Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 5 of my fly build from Monarch, working more on my diorama and the additional machinery and lights. So I got a lot completed. I had said in the last video, and I thought that I would get done at this video, but quite a lot of work on the additional lighting, which I've completed for the most part, just a few little things here and there. So there will be one more video after this to complete it, to finish working on the both figures and getting them done and getting everything onto the diorama. Quite a bit done on this video though, and some really cool effects that I came up with using some different LED lights that you'll see here in a moment. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I began working on the back machinery behind the transporter at the back end of the diorama, including the control panel that came with the kit. So this is the only part from the kit for the diorama that I'm using is the controls, because it is actually fairly accurate. I think I'm going to go ahead and sand off the spider web. Although at some place here I do want to put in a spider web with the little fly and the little man fly, tragic man fly, I'm sorry. And I want to fix those scratches, maybe cover that up. I don't want to do the damaged version. And the same with this groove on top. I just want it to look like the regular controls. As I said previously, I decided not to break the transporter or have any damage to it. So he's at the point where he's just revealed as the fly after his last transporter attempt. And his wife is screaming before she faints. And after she faints, that's when he grabs the machinery and starts throwing it around and axe and chops it up. So I'm not going to do that part of it. I'm doing it right before that occurred. So everything's still in one piece. I'm not really going to try to light up any of these controls. But I am going to use some little googly eyes to put little bubbles over top of these ones here. And then paint it, of course. So the general idea that I've gotten from the film, from stills, trying to get some different shots, because it's hard to see. It's pretty dark in that room, the first room, and the transporter's in the way, and the way they filmed it and everything. It's really hard to tell where all the things are, but I have some general images. So you have this over here on this side. Behind it, you have a taller, it looks like one of those old style 50s or 60s computer banks, where you have the two wheels with the reel-to-reel going around on it, and it's just basically a big rectangle. There's another one over on this side, and then in between you have the little squares that are blinking all over the place, and you have some controls underneath that at the bottom. And there's some other little machinery things that are added on. Over here then, you have what looks like a big fish tank, aquarium as it were. It looks like it's enclosed in glass, but you have those little neon twisted parts that are glowing and blinking green and yellow and that kind of thing. And they're within glass, and there's some metallic machinery parts. They're neon, and then it's all housed in a piece of glass, and then it sticks out from it, and you have the computer bank behind it. So I'm going to have that over here. So what I did was I realized that I have to extend the back of it out just a little bit. So I have this piece of wood, which is 1.5 inches this way, and the length of, I think, 13 inches. So on this side is going to be the controls with the computer bank behind it. On this side, the neon tubes, but also with the computer bank behind it. And that's going to be sticking out in like a rectangular box. And in between, you have the blinking squares with other controls. So I scratched out a couple of lines to get the right dimensions that I wanted. So the first thing I did was I measured out and I cut out 2 pieces of wood, and I reinforced them in the back to make the computer banks. And these are going to be the same. So 2 of those. And then what you're going to have is the controls are not as wide as it, so there's going to be a little bit of an overlap on either side. So this is how it looks, and up here you have a squared off part with the computer reel-to-reels, and I believe that's covered in clear plastic like glass. I'll have to look at it, and a framework around it, but nothing too elaborate. This one's going to be the same thing, and maybe a little bit of controls down below it. that kind of thing, to go on either side of these. And just like I've done before, I'm going to have styrene sheet over top of these and the edges. Use some styrene stripping and things like that. Find something to make the little reel-to-reel things. Paint those aluminum, that kind of thing. And then start working on the parts in between here. So, all right. So I'm figuring out the positioning of the back components. So we're going to have the two computer panels with the control panel in front of this one on this side. This will just be a computer bank. And then I'm going to have those lit up controls in the middle. And then underneath it, and I just marked off this piece, I'm going to cut this piece of wood out so it matches the inside of this. And then that's going to have just some other controls underneath it, and possibly some lights, maybe some blinking lights, some red lights, it looks like, inside of there, as far as that's concerned. And then this piece here will have a framework around it because I need to have the lights shining through the styrene, so I can't have that blocked off. But I'm just getting the basic placement. So once I get this cut out, I can start working on a framework for this, and then figure out how I'm going to possibly paint it. I've tried to look at a couple screenshots. It looks like, unfortunately, it's really dark in that part of the room. The other room is a lot brighter, more lights. That's why the two transporters seem to have different colors. In some shots they look like it's really dark, other shots like a really light metallic. So I think it's just the lighting. And I'll show some scenes here in just a moment with some pictures that I found. Some are in black and white too, so it's kind of hard to tell the coloring, but you get an idea of how it looks. So this tends to look a little more of a light gray. Same with this panel, seems to be more of a light gray, maybe even a metallic, but it's hard to tell because some of the shots are in black and white, which tends to obscure the real color. But I can't paint this too dark or the lights won't come through. So I want to do a little test, and right now the lights come through really well, and I'll show you the lights here in a little bit, the ones that I got from Evan Designs. And so I'm going to do a test to see if I just do a very light gray over it, just to give it a little bit of color. It doesn't seem to have any darker lines or anything like that in it. It does seem to be split, so I'm thinking of splitting this and having a little section in the middle, spreading this out a little bit. So we'll see. I'll play with it, and then get an idea of how that's going to work. So, all right. And here's the light sequencing unit from Evan Designs. So it has, there's a little circuit board. You have two wires coming off of that, which go into a switch, and a battery clip, which came with it. This all came with it, which is really nice. And I got the set that has 20. You can do 10 or 20. It's $20 if you get 10. It's 30 if you get 20. Because you're adding 10 additional lights. These are the little nano, so they're pretty small, cool white. And if you were going to do it, the way they're designed is this is made to be like a movie marquee where the lights are blinking in sequence going around. So if you wanted to do it that way, you would have to get them separated. They're not marked, but you can tell when you turn it on, you know, the way that they're blinking. So you would just attach them one at a time, that kind of thing. I want them to be random, so mine isn't really a big issue. I want them to be randomized. But what I did was I did a test. So I took a piece of this, and first did it light gray, and the lights were coming through just fine. So I went ahead and put on a like a neutral gray, which is darker, and I think I like that the way it's going. And I just taped on some lights on the back, and let me turn that on and show you how that looks. And it might wash out a bit in the camera. There we go. Okay, so pretty cool. So obviously they're not all quite centered, as you can see from this one. and you're getting some random lights from the other ones. But they're shining through just fine. I can see them just fine through the dark gray. So that's going to work out good. I'm not going to have any kind of lines between these. They're just going to be individual squares because that's how they look in the film. There will be the separation, like I said, with this here between the two, and there'll be some strips around the edges, that sort of thing. But other than that, it's just going to be the gray. So that's going to work out pretty cool. Now, one thing I did notice, you can see that when it lights up, it is showing more than just the square, because it's just a piece of styrene sheet. It's not, they're not really separated. It's just smooth styrene on the back. So the light is spilling out around the square. So I did come up with an idea to try to eliminate that. Plus it'll also solve another problem. So let me show you what I'm doing with that part. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm using this self-adhesive tape. It's for striping like on cars, that kind of thing, model cars. It's self-adhesive, it peels off the back. I believe this is 2 millimeters, I'm not exactly sure, but maybe 2 or 3 millimeters. So what I'm doing is I'm putting on these strips, as you can see, and what I do is hold it up to the light so you can see the lines from behind and just line it up. And then obviously line it up this way. So I have 2 this way, 3 this way, so forth. So I'm gonna go and do the whole entire thing. So it does 2 things. One, it makes the little square where the light's gonna go. So when I put them on the back, I know where to position them because there's no way to tell unless I'm holding it up to the light, but it's hard because I'm gluing LEDs or SMDs onto here. This will give me exact positioning, which is nice. But secondly, it will darken the outline of it a bit. And then what I'm gonna do is, once I have all of the lights glued onto this, and I'm using 2 sets of these, 20 for each side, so 40 altogether. I'm going to, and I get them all glued into place randomly, then I'll just spray this whole thing flat black. So it'll light block the rest of it and help to only concentrate the light in the little squares where I glue on the SMDs. And also keep the light contained so it's only coming out in the front to make it the brightest that it can be. So I think that's going to work just great, especially with the idea of being able to line up the lights on the back. Since this is just smooth styrene on the back, it doesn't have the squares like it does on the front. So there's no way to tell unless, some people have like a light table. I don't have one of those, but if you had a light table, you could put under it so you can see the squares. But this will work just fine. It didn't take me long at all to put those ones on. So I'll just put on the rest, and then I can start positioning the LEDs where I want them to be, and randomize them. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. Now, of course, these ones, like I said, they run off of a 9-volt battery, so these are going to have to be wired in as a separate power source. The other lights are 3 volts, so they're running off of 2 AA's for the rest of the transporter, and also for the little neon lights that I'm doing over here. They're going to be 3 volts. So that'll work. I'll just have 2 separate power supplies and a separate switch for these to come on. They don't make these in the 3-volt version. Not sure why. It's something to do with the circuit board, but it only comes in 7 to 12 volt range for them. So, all right. Okay, there we go. So there's just one of the lights. So you can see, if you look at the bottom there, and that one's painted. So that one, when it lights up, let's split second, you're seeing the lines all around it. This one, it's not quite as obvious. It's hard to tell because it isn't painted. But obviously, I think painting it will help it to eliminate that a little bit more. But it should work to at least light block somewhat and make it a more of a concise little square. But as I said, also the important part is it'll be easy for me to line up the LEDs, the SMDs. So what I'll do is I'll just tape it in place over the various random squares I want to do. Not tape over the LED, just on the wire part. And then just put a dab of 5-minute epoxy over each of them. and let it harden, and then do a couple more, let it harden, and so on. So, all right. All right, as I showed in the previous stills, that is the back that I painted silver first of all to kind of reflect the light, then some black. There's a little bit of light coming through, but it's not a big deal. I'm not going to worry about it. But that's the back of it, and then there's the front. And I still have to paint it gray. So I took it and I stuck it inside of the framework that I finished up, and I finished the top and the bottom edges. And I wanted to have an overlapping edge, so what I did was once I put it in there, I glued on these strips of styrene to frame it, and then they fit over top of the edges where this sits down inside of the frame. All right, I wanted to do that first so I can get it glued on nice and sturdy, plastic to plastic, before I go ahead and paint it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it the neutral gray, and then let it dry completely. I'm going to just mask off right around the inside so I can paint the outer edge of it like a metallic, some kind of metallic. So, okay, and then I think that'll look pretty cool once I have it done. Now that's only 20 lights, so I mean that's 20 lights, but it doesn't look like 20. What I'll probably do on the other side, because there's going to be two of them, actually it's going to be up like this. There's going to be another one on this side. So what I'll probably do is maybe make those a little more random. What I did was I glued together sets of two that blinked in unison, as you can see. This set here, there's a set next to it, this one up here. So I did a couple of those, and then I did some other single ones. It's going to look fine when it's all done, because you're going to have two of them. And I want to have the idea that it's not full-blown powered up to power the transporter. It's after he's done for the last time, came out of the transporter, and it's just sort of idling in a way. So this is going to be kind of idling, and so is the other one. So, all right, let me go ahead and get some paint on that, and then we'll see how that's going. All right, so I went over it with the neutral gray. You can still see it over the edges, the outer frame. And it was a little too dark, and I didn't like how it was obscuring the light. So I took some Tamiya thinner and some Q-tips, and I just rubbed off the paint. And actually it worked out really cool. It left the paint down in the grooves, so you have the separation of the different panels. So what I'm thinking of doing is just going over this now with just a very light gray, just very lightly, just to bring it down a little bit from the white, make it a little more even, so the light will stay nice and bright. And they're actually brighter in person than they are on the camera. But now you can see that they're actually blinking within the little squares, which is kind of cool. All right, so I like that. And I'm going to do the outer frame in a metallic, as I said. So let me just go ahead and get a very light gray over top of that. And then that should keep the darker panel lines underneath, which is kind of cool. All right. All right, there we go. So just a very light misting of gray over it to give it a little more even tone. I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to paint the outer rim, outer frame, a metallic, probably an aluminum, and then I go to do the second one. But I really like how that turned out. It definitely gives it more distinction with the squares. You can now see them, and it looks more like a control panel now that you can see the individual squares. So a bit of a happy mistake. At first I was just going to do a light misting like I did on my test one, and it seemed to be okay. But this one, just to get it more even, it was still a little dark. It was obscuring some of the lights. So I just started taking it off with the Q-tips, and in the end, it worked out really well in my favor to darken in those lines and make them more distinct and give it a little more, a better look on it. So, all right, so I have to do the other side, and then obviously finish framing up this, and then the blinking controls will be all done. But looking pretty cool. All right, so I finished the grid work on the second panel, and I started gluing down the lights. So I have 7 of them glued down randomly. I just have 2, together up in this one corner here, but I might only do one other one with 2 together. But for the most part, I want to kind of spread them out and make them more random. So I'll let that first set dry. That's about 1/3 of them, and then I'll go ahead and tape down another set and glue them, and then probably have to do 3 altogether. All right. All right, and here is the other panel with the lights on it. I still have to finish up the framework around it, get that painted, and then I'll get it glued into the main thing. So let me show you that. All right, and there is the completed upper section with the blinking lights. Turned out really, really cool. Really happy with that. And I just have a neutral gray over the rest of the framework to make it look dark, so the rest stands out. And here it is behind just propped up behind the transporter to show you kind of what it's going to look like. It's not necessarily centered correctly where it's going to be, but it's going to look pretty sweet back there. And it's going to be standing up straight, obviously. So, all right, really happy with how that turned out. All right, so I started working on the panel underneath of the blinking squares panels. And as I showed in the previous stills, I took the wood part that I made and had cut out. I glued some styrene onto it, and I cut out the area where I'm going to have the controls coming through. And then what I did was I took a piece of, well, first a piece of the white styrene, and I just drew out where I wanted some controls to be. They're not necessarily accurate to the film, but they're kind of what I'm wanting to go for. They're going to be red and white blinking lights. And then on the back of it, I cut out a piece of, I don't want these fiber optics to fall out. This is UV resistant styrene, black styrene. So it blocks light very nicely. Because I'm going to have fiber optics in these holes to do the lights. And I just have the blinking lights from Evan Designs, like right there, flashing SMD 3-volt cool white. And I have some red ones too. One of them flashes normal. I believe the white ones flash normal, the red ones flash slow. So they're going to flash out of sync as well. And I'm already starting to experiment with, this is some fiber optic. I think it's 0.75 millimeter, but I'm not quite sure. But anyway, it fits into this hole, and then when I mushroom the end of it, it stays in there. So I have all the holes drilled. What I'm starting to do now is to put in some fiber optic, which I figured out I can do 4 of them into this square tube. So I'm going to cut off little sections of the square tube and then take 4 of them into it and put a light on the end in order to illuminate it. And I could put some shrink tube over that to make it light blocked as well. And so what I'm going to end up with is, so 2 here, and I think I'm going to alternate. So like these 2 plus these 2 go into one, these 4 go into another. Same with over here. And then each of these will be in one. So I'm going to do the red over here and here. These are going to be white. And so altogether, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 light boxes with 6 lights. So I have 4 of the red ones that I need, And I actually have 4 of the white, but I'm going to use 2 of the white for other things too, which I'll show you in the future. But what this is going to do then is, I'll show you, this goes in from behind and fits into that opening. All right, there you go. So it's still rough, but I'm going to have stripping around the outer edge of this, stripping down inside around the actual part. And then I'm also going to have some dividers in between, and maybe some other little controls on there too. And from what I can tell from the film, this area is black. And then I'm probably going to go with the similar dark gray or the neutral gray on the rest of it. And then down below, there's just some pretty big machinery, which I'll come up with down over here just to be in front of that. So that'll be another sub-assembly. But for now, that's all I'm doing with this. And I'm kind of debating, but probably not going to put anything on the edges of this, since all this is going to be, none of this is going to be seen. It's going to be glued onto the top part, and then the sides are also going to be blocked by the 2 side computer units. So there's no reason to put styrene around it, which also adds to the edge of it. And it's the same thing I did on the control panel. I only put styrene on the top because that's the only part you're going to see that is going to be exposed. So the rest of it I don't have to worry about putting styrene on, except the outer edges of all the machinery. So, okay, so let me continue working on this. And this one shouldn't take too long at all to finish. And then we'll see, at some point I'll work on getting the other machinery, but that can be added in afterwards. All right, so I added some more bits of styrene stripping to add some different sections to the controls. Painted the whole thing flat black and then put on some Vallejo steel on the metal parts. That centerpiece, I took a little piece, I believe from a Y-Wing kit from Bandai, glued that in place, and then just dry brushed some metallic over it, give it some character. I also painted the main thing with a neutral gray, and I put some half round stock around the edge to give it a finished look, and painted that with the steel as well. All right, and then I've started to wire in or put in the fiber optics. So I have the 0.75, and I have 4 red into this one, 4 red into this one, and 4 white into the one in the middle. I still have to do the other side in order to finish the lighting. All right, let me go ahead and get that in there, and I'll show you how that looks. All right, and there is the 1/2 lit up and blinking. The red ones look a lot more red, deeper red in the real life. They tend to get washed out in the video. Sometimes if you get closer, it looks good. It's a little better, but all right. So I still have to do the other side and put those in. There they are on the back. And that's just taped in right now. That's not in there permanently either. So, all right. But that's going to look pretty fantastic for the blinking lights. Give it a little more character and some extra random lights blinking in there. All right, so I'm working out an idea, and I tried a couple of ideas in order to make the neon glowing tubes over to the right side, which look like they're in an aquarium or a glass case kind of a thing. But they're obviously neon bulbs that they used. And from what I can tell, they have blue and yellow and maybe green on there, and they're kind of blinking or flashing, as it were. So at first I thought I would take some wire and, well, let me back up a second. So I'm taking a page from Boyle Hobby Time, where he uses these flexible LED filaments, which are really kind of cool. I've never used them before. These are 3 volt, and they are a foot long, 12 inches long. And I get them from a place called Brick Stuff which is in the US. I've heard of the people getting them from other sources, which are from out of the country, and they take longer to get. But these came in just, less than a week, a few days. And these are 3 volts, which are really nice. So I don't have to do any special wiring like I did for my Ahsoka Tano with the solid filament bulbs that I used from the light bulb. And then these they don't have yellow, but I got warm white, I got blue, and I got green. So they're very flexible and they're pretty bright. So let me turn this one on and show you how that one looks. All right, so this is just with a 3-volt battery. So you can see it's nice and bright. Now, if I get closer, you can actually see the individual little LEDs in it that are a strand throughout it. So ultimately, I want this to be yellow. And so what I'll probably end up doing is seeing if I can just paint this, airbrush some paint on and make it yellow. But it definitely looks neon, which I think is pretty cool, and it's flexible, which is also pretty cool. So at first I thought I could use some wire and maybe bend it to be the shape that I want, this weird looking shape. And then either tie on or glue on the filament onto it and just wrap it around it. So I tried to play with that. The wire was pretty hard to work with and to keep it nice and flat. So I thought of another idea where I thought that I could bend these, if I considered each of these bends to be like a point that this would wrap around. So what I did was I took some plexiglass that I had left over that I used for the doors, and this was the first one, and it wasn't quite right. So what I did was I laid it on top of my drawing, and I just marked with a felt tip marker a spot where all the bends would be, and I put 2 on the ones that are supposed to be more rounded, kind of a thing. And then I took this and I used my little mini drill, which turned out to be pretty much the perfect size. And I had this, I have this thin acrylic rod that I got from Evergreen or from Plastruct. I think it's Plastruct. And I just cut off little pieces and glued it down inside the holes with some super glue. And then once I got it pretty much the way, figure out how it's supposed to be, I went and did it again a second time and I made it more accurate. So what's going to happen is, and then I glued these tubes at the bottom. So this filament can come up through this tube. It goes up, it wraps around this, it comes around these 2, back around these 2, back around these 2, over to here, wraps around this, the top one, over to here, comes down around these 2 here, back up around these 2, and down around this one and straight down through the tube again. Then in the middle, and that makes this piece right here that I just drew out for you, right there. Doesn't include this piece. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to include that or not. So then I wanted these 2 loops, so I figured I could just use one piece. So it comes up through here, it goes around this one, down here, around this peg, back up, around this peg, and back down through there. And all of these, when it's pulled taut, it makes it look like a nice design. And it'll be fine against the clear plastic, the plexiglass. And I can even cut off like an edge of this or sand this a little smoother once I get it going on there. And then the parts down here, you're not going to see these. So this part is going to be hidden underneath the machinery that I'm going to build over top of it. And that's going to extend down just a little further, maybe about 1 inch, to make the whole piece. And then I'll have one other one that's going to have something similar to this in it. So I'm just going to have 2. I'm not going to have 3. There's actually 3 separate sections in the film, but it's a much larger piece. So I'm only going to be doing this one. So, all right. So next what I want to do is go ahead and get some paint on this and try to position this and see how many of these I'm going to need. I know one of them will definitely do the 2 loops right here, but I might need to have more than one to do the other part. So, okay. All right, so I soldered some wires onto 2 of the strands, and I then painted them yellow. Trying to get closer to get a better look. It actually looks more yellow in real life than it does on the camera. It looks like the other one did. Now, if you look in reflection, it looks more yellow down in there. So it definitely is more yellow. Now, I sprayed on some Vallejo medium yellow. And I discovered that I could spray it on pretty heavily and it did not obscure the light. In fact, if anything, it kept it nice and glowing because it made it more uniform. It's like diffusing it, but keeping it within the tube. So what I figured out was I cannot connect these together unless I have wires coming down through it, and that's kind of a pain. So I figured out a way that one of these can start right about here, come up and wrap around and do most of the top and come down, and it ends right about here. Then the second one, and then I can run the wire down, straight down behind it, and I can disguise it, paint it silver or something, we'll see. Then the other one will start right here. It'll come over, it'll go around this, come down through this tube, come back up through this tube, and then do these other parts right here, and end up down here. So that's the best way to work it out. And then of course I'll have two wires coming straight down here, which are going to be powering the two ends, and the other ends are going to be coming out of here and one of these, so that it'll power them completely. And then once I get them taut and in place, I'll put 5-minute epoxy over the end to keep it taut and to keep it where it's supposed to be, and it won't come out. And then it'll just slide down over these pegs, obviously. There'll be a little bit of overlap in the middle, but that's okay. It'll be fine. And so these two here will complete this one section. And then I'll have to work on the second section with that other design that I said. And then I'll have to do the same thing and figure out how to go about making this look like this. And the thing of it is that these are pretty small, but when you start wrapping and twisting and turning them, a foot goes pretty quick. So I'm definitely have to do the same thing on the other one in order to get that to work. And I'm not deciding, I'm deciding if I want to do it in the blue or the green. Now, I did mark this blue because in the film this design was blue and this one was more of a yellow. But I'm not going to worry about it. I started working with the yellow one and getting it painted and stretching it, so I'll just leave it as it is and go from there. And I think they'll look just great. So let me keep working on that, and if I can get these ones onto here, and then I can complete this section and show you how that's going to look. All right, so here are the two completed sides for my neon tubes, one yellow, one blue. And I did the same with the blue. I painted that with the blue paint before putting it down. And it took me a couple of tries and I worked with a few things, but I managed to get a blinking circuit to work with it. Here it is right here. So as I showed in my previous build parts for the section with the blinking controls, I have red and white flashing LEDs that are pre-wired. Here's the circuit. So I tried the red one first because it was a slow blink, and it was just way too dim. It dimmed down the lights considerably. And so it really wasn't working right. And I tried a few other ideas. Sometimes if you simply put a blinking SMD next to them, wired them with the same circuit, it tends to make it flash, but that really wasn't working either. So then I went and I used the white one, which is a faster flash, and that one does work. It does dim it down a little bit, but I think it works fine because these are really bright, and they were a little too bright and garish anyway. So I like it better with just having that. So let me turn that on. Okay, looks really good. All right. So I think that'll work out just fine as far as that. I'll get these permanently cut down and wired in once I get everything else done with the box that they go in. And I still have to make some machinery for the bottom parts of this as well. Okay, but looking fantastic. Really happy with how those flexible filaments turned out. And they're going to be perfect for this. All right, so I built the clear enclosure that goes over top of the neon lights, and I just used some L bracket styrene strip and some clear styrene sheet, and then I made the top of it, which is still unattached right now. I just use a piece of thin balsa wood and use some stripping on the sides of it and the top, some styrene sheet, and I painted this like a neutral gray and then lightened it up a bit, and then I painted these with the aluminum, and then I'll glue this on when I'm ready to do it and put it over top. I also started working on the bottom, that the clear plexiglass with the neon filaments is going to go in the center. I centered it out. These holes are drilled for the wires to come down through for all of the separate LED strands. So there's 8 of them all together because I have 2 strands on each one, the blue and the yellow, and each of those has 4 leads. So that's 8 altogether. All right, and again, just some of the L bracket to make the stand, and it kind of looks like what it does in the film somewhat. It's not exact. I'm just kind of getting the major impression with it. All right. All right, so I finished up the bottom part there. I have it inside the cabinet right now. Let me take it out of there. I took some styrene sheet and I created some irregular parts, as you can see. And then I glued them down onto this part here. I moved back the holes a little bit so that the neon parts are back further to accommodate these parts in the front, and then and some of these parts, like the ones that are cut out there, they're designed to accommodate the larger pieces of the filament that actually comes down underneath the plexiglass and wraps around. And some of these holes are where some of the 5-minute epoxy glued on the wiring and that sort of thing. All right, so those will go behind this, and you won't see the bottom of the tubes where they're connected. You'll just see the neon parts coming out through the top. So it looks like they're coming out of this machinery. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and get this painted with an aluminum. And then once that's done and dry, I'll be ready to go ahead and glue down the 2 pieces of plexiglass with the wiring onto this. And this will be one whole subsection. And then this whole thing will go over top of it. And then I'll be able to work out the wiring and take it down through the bottom once I get it attached onto the diorama. And then a little bit more machinery in the front to hide the wiring as well. All right. All right, so I'm ready to go ahead and get the neon tube cabinet and the parts glued down onto the base and the wiring going underneath, so I can get it nice and secured and get the wiring put underneath and sorted out. So what I did was I took one of the uncompleted walls that's going to be one of the computer consoles, and I put it on here to measure the distance. Then I put the cabinet, the outer cabinet, down onto it. And before I did that, I took some thin brass tube, as you can see here, and I glued it into each of these corner L brackets, and the same on this part here, for a couple reasons. One, so it gives it a nice secure gluing point down into the base, because I'll drill holes to correspond with it. But also, I took a dab of some paint and I stuck it on each of them, and I sat it down so that I have some marks to drill. So these two outer ones and these ones are for the main cabinet part, sorry. And these two inner ones, you can't see that one very well right there and right here, are for the inner part. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and drill through the base, and it's pretty thick because you got the wood and you got the styrene on it. And I don't think I had mentioned, but I got a piece of styrene and I cut it out to measure this back part, and I painted it. I put it down, glued it down, and painted it with aluminum, because I had to add this extra piece of wood on to give me some more room, because I just didn't have enough room between the transporter. In the end, the sizes aren't going to be exact or accurate, of course, because all of this is going to be too close to the transporter, when in reality, in the film, they could walk behind it. This back is a door as well. But I'm not trying to make it too large and go for accuracy per se, but when I first made it, the width of it, or the depth of it, is only 12 inches, but it's 13 inches long, because I didn't have a board that was 13 inches wide. So I decided to add an extra piece, so I cut out another piece of wood, and I put some outer frame on it and put it on. Added the styrene and the parts on the side as well, so I could have some more room to work with. And I figured I'd just paint it aluminum, so it looks more like an aluminum plate or a metal plate at the bottom where all the machinery is stacked upon. So, okay. So let me go ahead and get this drilled out. And then once I get those positioned, I'm also going to cut a hole right in here in the middle to accommodate all of this wiring and take it down through to the bottom. So then I can glue this on into place and then glue the cabinet over top of it. All right. All right, and there, as you saw in the last still, I put a little bit of the soundtrack music or the sound effects music of the machinery. So here's the mocked up machinery in the back, the ones that are going to light up. So I did attach that one onto it, and I don't believe I showed it before, but you can see the machinery down there at the bottom. All I did was I used some parts from a Bandai Y-Wing kit, which is, in my opinion, the best kit bash kit out there. If you want some really highly detailed parts, it's quite amazing what it has. But I just glued some random pieces in between, and then I painted it with the chrome Vallejo, and went back over it with an oil wash to make it look a little dirtied and grunged up. So it hides the wiring underneath that goes down into the bottom that I showed before. So, okay, but that's looking fantastic. I really like the effects. The bottom controls there, the red and the white blinking. I didn't finish the ones on the right just yet, but I will. Some of those will be kind of hidden by the cabinet, but I'm going to put those in as well. And those would be the only light parts. So that's the rest of the lighting for this kit. I don't have the bottom pulsing on right now. I just wanted to mainly focus on the other machinery and the other lights that I came up with, which I think turned out fantastically. All right, so I still have to do those computer consoles on either side. The control panel, I have to paint that up. I'm not going to put any lights in that. And then I'm thinking it's a little short in the back, so I might just come up with some other piece at the end on the top that goes across the top and just add some random machinery in it just to make it a little more even with the transporter, since it turned out so tall. But it's coming along fantastically. Once I get the rest of those parts done, I can get all the back parts glued together and then figure out what to do with all the wiring and get it all fished down to the bottom and in the battery situation. So, all right, but very happy with the neon blinking lights. I think that looks fantastic and really adds to the effect. And definitely coming down to finishing this up. And we'll definitely do that in the next video. So, all right, stay tuned. All right, so that's going to wrap up this part, this build part. We'll definitely complete this in the next video, which is going to be very soon because time is running out and getting close to Wonderfest at the beginning of June. I'll definitely get this completed, and I'll still have a few weeks to spare that may look at one other model to build. We'll see. I have a few ideas floating around in my head, but definitely going to get this one completed. Really happy with how the flexible filaments turned out for my neon lights, and really looking forward to wrapping up all of the machinery on this build and on the diorama. So, okay, stay tuned, and thank you to all my new subscribers, and I will see you in the next video.